a noise, add a drone, add a pad, and place something over the top. Hi everybody and welcome to another Sonicware Liven tutorial. This time Sonicware have made a Liven dedicated to making ambient music in the form of the Ambient Zero. The Ambient Zero uses 4 layers. 3 of these layers are dedicated to blend wave synthesis. Blend wave synthesis uses 6 different structures. These are specially designed to make it easy for you to make different types of ambient sound. The 4th layer is a noise layer which uses samples. The 6 structures are pre-routed, including a mod LFO, and there are 2 user LFOs per track 2. The structures all have a wavetable at their centre, but Atmos 1 also incorporates ring modulation and Atmos 2 uses frequency modulation. The Ambient Zero has 9 different types of shimmer reverb and a global effect. It's also possible to record your own noise samples on the device, or you can convert and import WAV files. There are some preset patterns on the machine, but there are also some preset templates, so you can jump straight in and start making your ambient jams. So let's have a good look at what the Ambient Zero can do. So let's start, as I always do, just by going over the physical construction of the Ambient Zero. We've got our power socket here for our adapter, power switch that we hold to turn the device on. We've got our display, a sync in and out sockets for analog pulses from things like Korg Volkers, MIDI in and out on DIN sockets. We've got line in and out, and a headphone socket. This top row of knobs is dedicated to adjusting the blend wave oscillator. We've got a value knob here, which is an encoder, which is stepped for adjusting values. This row of knobs here relates to the filter and adjusting the LFO, setting up the effects, etc., BPM and volume. We've got a row of rubber buttons here with shift and function, which we can access extra features, which I'll explain a bit later. Layer selection, parameter locking for automation, adjusting the octave of the keyboard, and then we've got a transport control. This row of buttons here is our steps, so this is for entering steps into the internal sequencer. We've got some functions below, and then our keyboard as well, with also some menus below that. Then on the back of the device, there's a battery compartment for 6 AA batteries. So I'm just going to put my power adapter in, and then hold the button to turn it on. And the first thing you'll be able to do is play one of the preset patterns. So we just press play here. And you'll be able to hear that through the internal speaker. Something we can do now is we can plug headphones into the headphone socket, and that will automatically mute the internal speaker, or we can use the dedicated speaker mute function. So one of the conventions of the Livens is that we've got shift and function buttons. So holding shift, we can access extra features written below the knobs in lowercase letters, and function enables us to access features written below the different buttons. So mute here and voice modes, and then also these menus down here. So if we want to mute the speaker, we just hold function and press this button here. So we've got speaker mute, and that will mute the internal speaker. So for the rest of the tutorial, I'm just going to put a cable into the line out and then capture the audio directly. So now when we press play, we'll hear a nice clean recording from the line out. Pressing play again will stop the pattern. If you decided to use headphones, you can boost or reduce the relative volume of the headphones compared to the output by using the headphone gain here, so function and gain. Pressing that will reveal a menu, and we can use the value knob to change it so it's normal. We've got soft, and I like to put mine on loud. So we can adjust the tempo of the patterns by using the BPM knob here. Anytime you see a little dot in the right corner of the screen, that tells you the saved value. So the saved value of the BPM of this pattern is 60. We also have a global BPM. So that BPM is saved within the pattern, but if we want to overwrite that and load new patterns without the BPM changing, we can select global BPM. So we've got a BPM button here, so function BPM. We switch that to global. Now, when we adjust this global BPM with Shift and the BPM knob, that will override any settings within the pattern. So if we load another pattern now, that will stay at 100 BPM. But let's just put it back on the pattern BPM for now and leave it like that. By the way, we can lock our Shift button. So for example, if I wanted to keep adjusting this global BPM without having to hold Shift, I can go Function and Shift and tweak this without having to hold this button. And then if we want to exit the Shift lock, we just press Shift. One feature that's worth talking about early on is the knob latch feature. That's on this button here. If we hold Function, we can see this isn't lit, so the knob latch is switched off. So any tweaks I make will immediately have an effect. So this BPM knob, as soon as I touch it, I'm going to be changing the BPM of the pattern. But if I load that back in again and go Function and knob latch to turn knob latch on, I move this BPM and it won't affect it. So you can see we've got chasing LEDs going left. It's telling me to turn this knob down. Until we hit 60, it won't make any difference. And that affects all the knobs on the face of the Liven. So you can make sure you preserve the contents of a pattern without accidentally tweaking them by turning on knob latch. But I'll turn that off again for the rest of the tutorial. So if we want to load another one of the preset patterns or templates, we can press pattern button and then choose a new one. We can either use these step buttons here to select one of the patterns within the selected bank. We can change the bank with the octave buttons. So bank 1 contains preset patterns with information stored in the sequence and then also some templates. Whereas banks 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 will be blank when you get the unit. So if I want to load pattern 8, I can press 8 and then that's loaded. Or I can press pattern and we can use the encoder. You'll just keep scrolling through all of them into the next banks and so on. So let's go for Dawn. This is a bit of dark ambient stuff. As you can notice, when I press the play button to stop the pattern, it's going to stop immediately, but we have another option on this Liven. We can use a natural release. So the instruments have a fade out due to the length of the amp envelope. So if we want to use that when we end the pattern, we can press Function and play and it will fade out naturally. Which gives us a less abrupt ending. Another thing we can do is we can queue up a pattern. So whilst this was playing, we could press the pattern button, pick another pattern number, and this sequence would then wait till it reaches the end, and then the next pattern would play. I'm not going to demonstrate that because the preset patterns are quite long. Another way to use the pattern button is to go into pattern chain mode. We access this by pressing it twice, so it turns orange, and you can then select a number of patterns, and then when you press play, they will play through in a loop. If you don't want to play through in the loop, we can change the behavior from the system menu, which we'll look at later. As I briefly mentioned earlier, we can change between the different layers using these buttons here. We've got drone, pad, Atmos, and noise layers. So this track or layer contains a drone sound. Then we can change to the pad. And there's an atmospheric noise. And a noise on the top here. We can also mute different parts using these buttons too. So if I mute that noise and then press play, it's going to play without that layer. If I bring it back in again, that sort of siren sound is sitting on top in the noise layer. This just mutes the sequence information, so I can mute that noise and still play it. That's the default behavior. We can change that again in the system menu, which again we'll look at later. So as we said earlier, the first bank is split up into preset patterns, which contains sequence information, so notes will play when we press the play button. But there's also some templates in there too. These don't contain any note information, and they are located from patterns 9 to 16. So if you press the pattern button, anything from 9 to 16, when we load them, there's no steps in the sequencer, so pressing play won't produce any sound. But each of the layers of these template patterns still contain different sounds. So a drone within layer 1, pad in layer 2, Atmos in layer 3, and a noise in layer 4. And they'll be different depending on which pattern we load. So if I play this drone, and then scroll to the next preset. You can see that they're all different, and the same is true of the pads and the Atmos. So it's quite simple just to load up a template and make something from there. So a good way to get going is just to load up one of these preset templates, and we can build a jam without even using the sequencer because we've got a hold function. Hold works like a sustain pedal. So if I hold this button here, it's OK button, has obviously got hold written above it, and play a key, that note will sustain. We can then add notes to that stack by also pressing hold and pressing a key. And we can release notes from that stack with the same function. So hold and C, that C will fade away if this G keeps playing. If we've got multiple notes playing on the same layer and we want them all to end, we can use clear and OK. So clear and OK will stop both these playing. Then if we've got things playing across multiple layers, we can use clear and play, and that will stop them all. So I'll just get a bit of a jam going, and then we can stop that using that function. So let's have a bit of a noise. Add a drone. Add a pad. And play something over the top. Finish, we can just go clear and play. Notice how layers will fade away. So on the Ambient Zero, we've got 9 types of shimmer reverb, and we can send different amounts of the tracks to that reverb. We can send an amount to the main body of the reverb and to the shimmer. We can do that separately. So this template has some reverb already on it, so let's just turn that reverb knob down. We can hear the drone dry. It sounds like that. And the more we turn this up, the more it's going to be sent to the reverb. So if we turn that reverb send down now and turn up the shimmer send, so that's on the shift. So if you use the function shift, we can lock our shift. We can hear that shimmer's creating kind of a high sound above our drone. We can adjust the reverb mix from here, so all the way over this side will be fully wet, and down the bottom it'll be completely dry. So that's just the output. So we can choose one reverb type per pattern. We can select the type from here. So function and reverb type, I'm using infinity low. There's infinity medium and high. Then we've got off, small, low, medium and high, and large, low, medium and high. So the low, medium, high determines this sort of frequency output, and the other part of that determines the sort of length of the reverb. In addition to reverb, we've also got an effects section here. We've got the knobs to adjust the speed and amount. We can change the effects type from here. So this is set to delay on this particular pattern, so we can change the speed and amount of delay here. The effects section goes over the whole mix, so this is just these two controls to determine the overall sound. So we can choose some other settings, like we've got reverse delay, got a drive, and then a bit crusher, tilt EQ, chorus, and off. If you want to look up what the knobs are specifically doing for those effects, you can see that in the manual. Another thing we can do with our jams is use the tune all function. So this tunes all the layers. So once again, if I get a bit of a drone going and a pad, and then use the shift lock function, I can tune everything at once. I can also adjust it finally with the value knob. So that's quite a cool way of just getting a bit more performance out of it. So if you've made some adjustments to a template and you want to keep that for yourself, you can save it. So at any point we can press function pattern and we've got pattern save. And then we're prompted to choose a new slot. We can choose this one if we want, and that'll overwrite that. If I wanted to find another slot for it, again, I can use the bank buttons or the step buttons. The easiest thing to do those maybe just to scroll over with the encoder. That takes us into bank 2. I can press OK. So now that dark template is saved in bank 2 pattern 1, including all the changes we made. So that includes a sequencer as well, so if you've written notes into the sequencer, that's how we save that too. So if we take a close look at the front panel, we can see we've got some sections where we've got text that's blue in a grey background, and then sections where the text is grey on a blue background. As we select each layer, the settings made to each layer are done in the sections with the blue writing on the grey background. So we've got settings for each layer separately for the blend wave, oscillator, the filter, LFO, etc. And that's true of any section with blue writing. So we can see all these settings here are done per layer 2. Settings for the sequencer are also saved on a per layer basis too. So that includes the notes within the layer, the length of the layer, etc. But the sections where we've got grey text on a blue background are done per pattern. So the per pattern reverb and effects amounts are here. Also the random sequence settings and things, these are done on a per pattern basis. As I mentioned, tracks 1 to 3 use blend wave synthesis, so that's a synthesis technique, whereas the noise layer uses long sampled audio recordings, which is something I'll talk about a bit later. So talking of tracks, if we want to copy one from a template or one of the preset patterns, we can do that. So with this pad selected in this template, I want this sound, I can copy it to another layer if I want to, so hold function and press copy. And then select another layer and press paste, which is here, and that sound will then be pasted into this layer. Or we can paste it into a new layer in a new pattern. So if I press pattern and just select a blank pattern, so this is the drone that comes as standard. If I paste it in here, that's going to paste that drone from that preset template into here. So if we wanted to, we can pick and choose different sounds from the preset templates and patterns and build up a palette that way. But let's just go back to talking about wavetables. So what wavetables are is they are a string of single cycle waveforms. Where most synthesizers have a single oscillator sound, so you might select a saw and then filter that. Wavetables enable us to have lots of waveforms all in a row, and we can scan through them. So if I just go to a blank pattern, let's go bank 2 pattern 2, we're going to get this saw wave sound. Just going to turn the release down for a minute while I explain. So our wave knob will choose different wavetables. So that loads a whole bank of waves in 128 of them. And then our harmonic knob chooses to position within that wavetable. So some of them are smooth, whereas some of them, like the random selection at the end, you can hear the individual steps as it changes. So each one of these settings on the harmonic knob is a different position within the wavetable. So I've just quickly put a patch together. This patch will scan through each position in the wavetable, and I'll just go through each wavetable and we can listen to their contents. So there's 32 wavetables to choose from, and as you can hear, there's a lot of variety in there, so we've got plenty of stuff to make our patches with. So if we take a close look in the blend wave modulation oscillator section, we can see that harmonic, balance, detune, pitch and mod have little underscores under them. These all relate to parts of the diagram and they will change depending on which structure you use. So if we just zoom in on this particular structure, we can see where all those assignments are made. I'll go over all the structures in detail, but depending on which structure we choose, the mod, detune, pitch and balance controls will affect different parts. Then if we want to control other things that the structure hasn't already pre-routed, we can control them with our LFOs. So we've got assignable LFOs here that we can send to different parts of the structures. So let's get stuck into some sound design stuff. So once again, I'm going to load bank 2 pattern 2, which will be empty. And we can hear this first drone track has a saw with a very long release on it. We can set the attack and release of our envelope here. I briefly mentioned it earlier, but if we hold shift and turn this down, we can shorten this to an instant release. We can lengthen the attack if we want a fade in. So that's good for pads. You can have nice long attacks and releases, but I'm just going to turn that down for now. So we've just got that, because there's a few things about the different structures that I want to go over. We can select a structure using shift and this knob here. So drone 1 and 2, and then pad 1 and 2, and then Atmos 1 and 2. So that's just selecting between these 6 structures. So you may have noticed we can choose whichever structure we like. So we can put drones in this one if we want, pads in here, and any order we want. This is really just for convenience, just to help you understand the layout of the presets and patterns. So one of the per layer settings is voice mode. These are the same across these 3 tracks, but noise has some slightly different settings, so I'll cover that later. By default, we're set to polyphonic, which enables us to play chords. If we hold function and press this button here, we can cycle through them. Or once it's on the screen, we can use the volume knob to change it to. So the next one along is mono, and that enables us to play one note at once. Mono mode re-triggers the volume envelope, so if it's had a slight attack, you can hear it's fading in with each new note. We can add some glide with the voice mode adjust setting here, so that will glide between those notes. Next along is legato. This doesn't re-trigger the volume envelope, so that enables us to fade in and then play new notes. We also have voice adjust here with glide that's separate, so we can add glide in legato mode. Next up is unison. This plays 4 notes at once, and we can detune the notes away from each other. There's no detune by default, so voice adjust and dial this up. We can create a big unison effect. Next along is arpeggiator. This plays the notes that we're holding on the keyboard one by one in sequence. It's tied to note length, so on each layer the value of one step can be different. So by default it's set to 1 bar, so the sequence will only advance 1 bar per step, but we can change that. So I go into note, I'm going to turn that up to 16ths, and now when we play the arpeggiator it will play each note a 16th. I'm going to add a little bit of release. As you can hear, it's playing each of those notes in sequence. And then we've got some different settings for the arpeggiator too in the voice mode adjust, so this changes the direction of the arpeggiation. Down, and you've got up, down. Various other settings, random, and then octaves. And then which order they were played in, so that's going E, G, C, E, G, C, and then back round to up. So I've gone back to our default setting, but I've just adjusted the attack and release, so we've got this sound. I'm going to start with drone 1, because that's the default setting for the drone track anyway. We take a look at drone 1, our little diagram that's got a sort of hexagon-shaped yin-yang with a H below it. That represents our blend wave oscillator. And the outputs are represented by the little hexagons sticking out of the left-hand side. So both our outputs are coming from the left of the blend wave oscillator on this. I'll get into the differences between the left and the right side when we get to drone 2. But we've got 2 identical outputs, but we can change the pitch of the top left output. We can also detune it, and we can also target detune with the modulator LFO, because that's where M is pointing towards. The balance by default would be in the center, so we can change backwards and forwards with this control. You can hear it's slightly louder in the center where both are playing together. We can detune them away from each other with this. So we get that classic detune effect. But we can also send the mod LFO to detune. So we can do that with the mod here. That is the mod speed. If we want to change the depth of that modulation, we can change it here. So turn up the depth. And then if we want to change the pitch of this top output, we use the pitch control here. So we've got a 2-octave range in either direction. 17 will give us a 5th. With pitch on the screen, by the way, we can adjust with the value knob too, to give it fine adjustments. So let's select a different wave. This one sounded quite good earlier when I tried it, so let's look at some of the other basic controls. We've got a level here, which controls the level of this layer. Below that is pan, so we can pan it from left and right. And then we've got a filter. By default, it's set to a low pass type with resonance for the filter. Then we can change the filter type here, so low pass, got a high pass filter, and a band pass filter, which turns the resonance control into width control. Or we can select off. We don't need to stop there though. We've obviously used our mod LFO, which is pre-routed in the diagram for the structure. But we've got these two LFOs here, LFO1 on the top and LFO2 on the bottom. And we get to change their shape and assignments from here. So by default, LFO1 is routed directly to the harmonic, which is this knob. So if we adjust these settings, that is going to move that backwards and forwards. So we can get some really cool stuff that way. We can choose a shape from here. So LFO1, we can have sine, put square, a triangle, saw, reverse saw. We've got random, which jumps and leaps around. A smooth random that does the same but in curves. We've got a logarithmic shape, reverse log, a pulse of 10%, 25%, 75%, 90%, and then there's these stepped waveforms. So quite a lot to play with. There's also a ramp. This is really useful later on when we come to use the trigger. We can use this as an envelope. So ramp up and ramp down. And in the assignments, we've got lots of things to play with too. So harmonic's the default, but we can set it to tune. So that moves the tuning backwards and forwards of the whole oscillator. Harmonic we've looked at. So balance goes backwards and forwards between these two. Like that. And then the pitch targets this knob. We've got detune and feedback, so that targets detune. It's the feedback control when we use Atmos 2, which we'll see later. We can target the modulation rate of this LFO with this LFO. We can target the depth of this LFO with this LFO. We've got filter cutoff, filter resonance, panning, and the level. So we can get tremolo effects. And we can modulate the amount that's going to the shimmer. sound that's going to the main body, the reverb, the same way. And then we can select off. So we've got two LFOs, so I'll show the other one in a bit because there's one tiny difference it has. So I've reloaded that pattern again. To start from scratch, let's have a look at drone 2. So let's turn our structure knob to drone 2. If we take a look at the structure diagram for drone 2, we can see that modulator is going straight into the middle of the drone wave oscillator. This means it will modulate the harmonic. One of the outputs is coming from the left hand side and another one is going from the right. We can change the pitch and detune of the right hand side. So what's the difference between the right and the left? When we modulate the harmonic using either the mod LFO or one of the other LFOs, the modulation direction coming out of the wavetable will be different. So it will go down on the left hand side and up on the right, or vice versa. The easiest way to demonstrate that is to change the mod shape. Mod shape is available here on function and shape. So we can scroll through, we can see we've got all the same LFO shapes we have on our other two LFOs. That changes the shape of this modulation LFO, which is the one shown as M on the structures. So I'm going to change it to a saw. So instead of going backwards and forwards, it'll only go in one direction and then reset. So if I select something like this, that's the contents of our wavetable. If I set it to the center, and then I turn the balance so we're only listening to the left, when we turn up the mod, okay, it's got a kind of downward sound to it, but if I change the balance the other way, it's going the opposite direction. This is something that's available in our two pad structures too, which also have the modulator going directly into the middle of the blend wave oscillator, affecting our harmonic. But let's do something a bit more interesting. Let's put this mod shape back on, say, triangle. Turn the speed down a bit. And the depth. Bring that balance back to the middle. We can affect the pitch of one of them. Detune them away from each other a bit. Add a bit of attack and release. Add a bit of reverb. Let's change the assignment of LFO1 to affect the pitch. And turn up the depth and time a little. So let's set LFO2 to affect the cutoff, for example. And we can turn up the rate and depth from here. One extra thing that LFO2 has over LFO1 is it can affect LFO1. So there's an extra assignment in here. So if we go through, we can see we have LFO1 rate. So LFO2 can target LFO1's rate or its depth. So that means we can affect LFO1 with LFO2, but we can also use both those LFOs to affect the modulation LFO, so we can get some really complex interactions between them all. So just as a reminder, if we need to save our work at any point, we can just hold function and press the pattern button, which is pattern save. So I'm going to save that into here, so I'm just going to press pattern 2 in bank 2, and that is now saved. So let's move on to looking at the pad structures. I'm going to select pad 1 on our pad layer. Taking a close look at the diagram, we've got a modulator heading into the center of our oscillator, meaning we can use it to control a harmonic. We've got an output on the left which has no controls. The balance between the left and the right hand side. And then we've got two outputs on the right hand side. So as discussed before, those two outputs will have a different direction when we control our harmonic with our modulators. We've got pitch and detune heading into both of those. The difference here being that one of them is tuned an octave down. So if we tweak backwards and forwards between the center, on the left hand side it should sound high, and then on the right hand side it's got an extra octave added in below because we've got two stacked oscillators. So this pad 1 is quite good at organ-like pad sounds. So let's pick a wavetable. I'm going to go for the sync one. I'm going to bring that balance back into the middle. So additionally I'm going to tune the pitch down, so we then have a stack of 3 octaves. 2 octaves down, 1 octave down because of this control, and then the output on the left isn't affected, so that stays in the middle. So we've got this big organ-like pad sound. Change the release and attack. target that mod a bit. Add a bit of detune. Let's target pitch with LFO2. So that's going to get us a bit more movement in our sound again. So not very much depth. With a bit of rate. Not that much depth. 1 or 2 is enough. And then we can tweak the cutoff. So we could move that by hand, or we could use the trig option that I was talking about earlier. So this enables us to determine when the LFO is triggered and how many times. So with it set to off, it's just free running. So it just continues going backwards and forwards regardless. Any other setting will re-trigger the oscillator whenever a key is pressed. So on 1, it's going to cycle once. So if we assign this to the cutoff and turn up our depth and rate, it's just going to cycle through that shape once. But if I were to change that trig to 2 or 3, for example, turn the rate up, you can hear it's just going 3 times because I've got it set to 3. If we keep going, we can choose all the way up to 8 times, beyond which it's set to infinity. So it will re-trigger every time I press a key, but we'll just keep going. Well, let's put that back on 1. So we're using it like an envelope. A bit of release. If we want to add even more octaves in, we can then add some shimmer. So that will produce a reverb as an octave above the sound that's being sent in. So that's just one example of what we can do with pad 1. So I've reset again. I'm going to go on to pad 2 on the pad layer. If we zoom in on this diagram, we can see we've got 2 outputs on the left-hand side, one of which has no controls. We can control the balance between these 2 left outputs. We can change the pitch of the lower one with the pitch knob, and we can detune the right-hand side one. Our modulator again is heading into the middle of the blend wave oscillator, meaning we can control our harmonic with it. So this pad structure is quite good at string sounds. So if we just stick to the saw wavetable, let's bring that release down for a minute. We can change the pitch of the lower oscillator, which remember we can do in fine amounts if we use the value knob. I can detune the right output with the detune control. With a bit of attack and release, we've got immediately a pretty serviceable pad sound. So we can dial up a bit of reverb. So all that is 3 saws that are tuned away from each other. We can get a bit more complex and add a bit of depth to our harmonic and move that around too. And it's worth experimenting with some different waves too. Which are all going to produce different results depending on the wavetable. So let's take a look at the Atmos structures. These differ a little bit in that they include a ring modulation in Atmos 1 and FM in Atmos 2. So starting with Atmos 1, let's just dial that in and take a look at the structure. So as you can see, this is very simple. We've just got a single output. We can adjust the pitch of it and we can introduce the modulator. But if you look at where the modulator is, that's actually on the output of the oscillator. So ring modulation gives us a metallic ringing sound. We've still got access to the harmonic, and we can introduce modulation to the harmonic if we want to, but we can do that with the LFO. So let's just take the standard sound that comes with the Atmos and tweak the mod. We should be able to hear a bit of subtle ring modulation there, and if we turn up the depth here, it becomes a lot more pronounced. This basically turns the mod here into an audio rate oscillator that is got a fixed pitch, doesn't respond to the keyboard, and we can sweep it around. It's also affected by the mod's shape. These are all going to give different results, along with random. But I'm just going to leave it on sine for now. Let's choose a different wavetable. So you can get some bell-like tones from this. So let's target the harmonic using one of the LFOs, because it's not part of the structure, but we can still do this. So we are on LFO 1, targets harmonic. We can turn up the rate and depth a bit. Let's set that trig to 1. So we've got these bell-like sounds again. Let's send LFO 2 to the modulation rate. So remember, this is the speed of the mod, which in this case is audio rate. So we can assign it to mod rate, and again maybe make the trigger 1, change the rate and depth. So with that we can do some nice weird stuff. The only other control on the structure is pitch, which we can modulate or just tune in ourselves, and everything else we're going to be doing with the LFOs. So lastly is Atmos 2, so let's dial that in and take a look at the structure. So Atmos 2 does things a bit differently. You can see one of the outputs is being sent into the other one. This is the way FM works. So in a standard FM pair, you have a couple of sine waves, and one influences the other, and the more it influences it, the brighter it gets. So that's replicated here. We also have a feedback path, as you can see where the D knob is, there's a little arrow that sends the signal back into the first oscillator. So that's feedback, that also exists within FM. We can affect the pitch of the first oscillator, and we can also modulate the pitch of the first oscillator using the mod LFO. Balance determines how much of the first oscillator is sent into the second. So traditionally FM uses sine waves, so let's start with that because it will give us a familiar starting point. So the more we turn up the balance control, the more the first oscillator is going to affect the second. So we've got some quite familiar FM tones there. If we turn up the detune knob, that's going to create feedback. Until we get to noise. Using the pitch knob, we can change the ratio between the two. Which is going to give us a predictable sort of FM synthesis results, just like a normal 2-up synth. But we can also use different waves. So instead of just using sine waves, we can try triangle waves, for example. Which is going to give us a new spin on FM. If we were to change the position within the wavetable, we're going to get, again, some predictable results perhaps. Because because a bright waveform interacting with a bright waveform is pretty much always going to cause noise. So if you want your results to be kind of subtle, start with smooth waveforms like sine and triangle, and then experiment from there. So with the mod LFO, we can target the pitch of the first oscillator. So if I just turn that up a little bit, let's go back to sine. And maybe make the depth a bit more subtle. Could do some interesting stuff with that. And then we can go really wild and modulate the harmonic as well as doing all this FM stuff too. So I might want to make LFO2 target the balance. And I said that's 1. Turn its depth up. Get us something fairly close to a normal FM sound, and then when we might want to take LFO1 and change that harmonic. Let's mess with the wave knob too while we're here. So as long as you're familiar with a little bit of FM theory, you can really dig into this experiment and get some really cool stuff out of it. So let's move on to the noise channel. As I mentioned before, the other 3 use synthesis. This one uses long audio recordings. They're 8 seconds long. We've got 8 different sample slots. And by default, these are full of sampled recordings of noise. We can mix them with white noise using the harmonic knob. So if it's all the way over to the right, we've just got white noise. And as we bring that back to the left, we're going to hear the sample. So we've got rain, fire, rumble, forest, and then some other things on the end. So there's only 8 sample slots in total, but they're stereo and they're 8 seconds long. If we overwrite any of them, we can download them from Sonicware's website and put them back on the machine. So I'll show you how to do that later. Like I said, this knob adjusts which sample we're using. We're mixing with white noise with this one. Structure changes the playback mode, so it's looped by default, but if we go to 1 shot, it'll just play once. And then stop. I'm going to leave it on loop. Your balance control doesn't do anything, but we can change the pitch of the sample and detune it with this control, which is a bit more obvious if the sample is tonal. And then we can route our mod LFO into pitch 2. Some crazy effects. And we still have most of the other assignments available on the LFO, so we can target the filter, level, panning, so we can still create some really interesting stuff by moving those sounds around. The voice modes are a tiny bit different. We've still got poly mode, mono, legato, and ARP, but we haven't got a unison mode. So we can add our own noise samples to this Liven. We can either do that by converting them online and importing them via MIDI, or we can just record them through the line-in. We can also use the line-in just to monitor external equipment. So from the line-in menu here, we can check those settings. So function and line-in. So we've got a gain setting, that's how loud it will be compared to the output volume. How much of it has been sent to the reverb, which is useful if you're just connecting an external device and you want it to mix with the reverb. How much of it has been sent to the shimmer part of the reverb, whether it's being sent to the effects or not, and then we can change the input from stereo to mono. So I've dug out my trusty mini disc player from back in the day when I used to make all my ambient recordings on a mini disc, and I'm going to connect that to the line-in. So this is something we can sample. So to record our samples, we need to be down here. I'm just going to cycle past this first setting to auto level. This determines how keen the Liven will be to detect audio and start recording automatically. We can turn it off completely if we want to do this manually, which is all the way over this side. I'm going to leave it on its maximum sensitivity. We can choose a crossfade. The crossfade is applied during recording, or rather when the sample is saved. This is not something we can alter afterwards, so we have to make these settings ahead of time. A 2-second crossfade is standard. And then the crossfade curve, we can decide whether that's exponential or linear. Again, exponential is the default. So I'm going to go to noise record, which is the first setting in this menu, and choose one of the slots. So I'm going to pick number 8. Let's overwrite that. So press OK, and then I can press play here. And you're going to see the LEDs will react to how loud this is. So I've got a recording here of some people inside an aircraft hangar. So I'm just going to hit record. That'll wait for an input now. And then when I press play, it should start recording. It'll stop recording automatically, and then we can check back our recording by playing the keyboard. And then when we press OK, the crossfade will be applied. And OK again, and that will save down into that slot. Yeah, we need to back out of here, so press cancel. And then on the noise channel, I can choose the slot we recorded to. And there is our recording. So the crossfade will have been applied at this point, so there will be a 2-second fade, so that this join the loop should be pretty seamless. So there we go. So I'm going to rename this sample. Let's head into the noise menu here, function and noise. The first is import, the next is export, and this is rename. So NSRN is noise rename. Press OK. And we can change the characters with the value knob and move the cursor around with the octave buttons. So I'm just going to rename this quickly. So once we've chosen a name, we can press OK, and that will be saved. And then we press clear to exit this submenu. And we can see that now that's changed here too. So one way you can think about these sample slots is that it's like having 8 little tape loops. I can hold OK and get a tape loop going, and then mess with the pitch and add some modulators and stuff, and we can do some interesting stuff. So just by sending a random LFO to the cutoff, we can create some instability, turning the speed down, like lowering the tape speed. So it's quite useful like that. Right, let's get stuck into the sequencer. So I'm just going to load up another blank patch. I'm going to select the drone. I'm going to turn down the release. So we just got this. Just going to keep it simple. We've got a metronome down here that we can turn on with this button. And then there's a metronome settings here. So we can turn the metronome volume up. And then we'll be able to hear a beep in time with the BPM. We've also got a record count in here, which gives us a number of count-ins when we come to record stuff. So I'll turn that up to 4. And later when we record things, it will give us a count before we start playing. But if we press play now, we hear a very slow beep. Because as I said, by default, the steps are set to a single bar. So this is going to flash 4 times before this moves. So let's just change that to something a bit faster. So the note setting 1 is 1/1 is a bar. We can make them even lower. We can go all the way up to 8 bars per step. So we can get some really, really slow sequences out of this machine. But let's just take it up to 16ths. So this entire 16 steps will then be a bar. So these settings have been made for just this layer. So this is set to 16. But if we go on to the pad, we can see this is still going to be playing at 1 bar per step, because these settings are done per layer. Once this reaches the end on layer 1, it's going to wrap back around to the start, because the length of this layer is set to 16 steps by default. So that's the length control here. So if we change this, we can turn it up and down. We can make it really, really short if we want to, just like 3 or 4 steps. And it'll just loop, or we can turn it all the way up to 64, which is 4 pages. So that's where these buttons come in. So if you can see, as it gets to here, these page buttons will change colour. And then back to the start. So this is page 1. Pressing this will get us to page 2. Double tapping this one will take us to page 3. This button then takes us to page 4, and double tapping that one takes us back to page 1. So that's the same sequence that these LEDs will light up in as it scrolls through a long layer on a pattern. You can also just press function and the length and it will cycle through a few preset lengths. So I'm just going to take it back to 16 steps for now, so it'll just play the one page. I'm also going to turn the metronome off just by tapping the metronome button to turn it off. So one of the easiest ways to put steps into the sequence is just to hold a step and punch in some notes. So if I just put a C here, G, and then those notes will play on those steps. If we want to clear a step, just hold clear and press a step and we can erase the notes. We can enter step record mode by pressing the record button and selecting a step. We then play a key and it will continue to play until we select another step. This, for example. So let's clear those. With step recording, we can also use auto step, which is in the system menu. So scrolling around the system menu, A step. If we turn that on and do the same thing, we can play a note and that will move automatically on to the next step. Which can be an easier way to enter information into the step sequencer. Obviously we can also play them in real time too. So if I turn that metronome back on and just hit record and play and then play some notes in. And we can also enter long recordings this way. So I'll just clear those again. So when tied notes is turned on here, that will enable us to record notes that are longer than one step. So by default it's on. When we hold function, this is lit. Like that. So that's obviously recorded a chord for that whole section. If tied notes were switched off, it would only enable us to record where the step starts. This is more useful for kind of percussive playing. It's possible to step record long notes too, so go into step record mode, select a step, and then play a chord or note, and then another step while you're holding the chord, and that will be pasted in, which will play back like that. In real-time mode, we've got a new feature on the Liven Ambient Ø, which is the overwrite. So normally when you play and you keep recording over the same sections, you add notes on top. So let's just have a go with that. So that's just layering them up. So with overwrite record, that's going to replace those notes in the sequence. So to use that, we use function and the record button. As you can see, it then overwrites anything that's already there. We have a sequence extend function too. So let's just shorten that length down again. Let's make it 8 steps. And I'm going to record something in those first 8 steps. So as you can see, those 8 steps now contain notes. If I wanted to duplicate that, I can go into the length function with function length and then hold shift and turn the value knob. Then that copies these 8 steps here. So that works for anything up to the entire 64 step length. So as you can see when I play now, this bit is the same as this bit, but obviously I can add notes in. We also have a transpose function, which is here, which means that we can shift the notes up and down in the sequence. So if I just play and move this, we can see how that works. It won't take effect until the layer wraps back round and we've got an octave transposition in either direction. One of the settings we can turn on per pattern is the random sequence function, so that's here. So let's just turn that on. At the moment when we play, that's not going to do anything, because we need to choose a setting per track, and that is done here with the random step. So we can select a number of steps that will be randomized. So if we set this to 4, it's going to choose chunks of 4 steps on that layer and just play them in a random order. let's just turn that off. We also have a dice feature that's located here, so that's note probability. By default it's set to 100%, so all notes will play. The lower I turn this down, the less likely the notes are to trigger. All the way down to 25%. This is something we can automate, as we'll see later when we come to look at parameter locks. So I could leave all the notes apart from a few at 100% and just have a few that are triggered randomly. And remember, there's lots of settings per layer, so we can choose different random steps per layer, different dice settings per layer, different lengths, different speeds, and have all of the different layers sort of playing off each other like that. So let's just load up one of those preset templates and make a bit of a sequence, because I want to demonstrate the parameter locking. So our drone sounds like this. If we turn the cutoff down, you can hear the LFO is moving backwards and forwards. So I'm just going to record a note into that sequence for the 16 steps. Now what we can do with parameter locking, when it's green, it's switched on, is we can change the position of these knobs for different steps. So I can set this rate by hand per step, just tweaking it in to a few different places, and then we'll be able to hear that change when it plays back. If I want to clear that parameter locking now, I can do that with clear and parameter lock, and that will be gone. So instead, if I wanted to real-time record it in, I can go function and parameter lock. It will turn red, and then when I play and move that knob, we can record it by hand. And again, if I want to clear that, just clear and parameter lock. We can cycle through and extinguish the parameter lock button, and that will disable it, or we can leave it on. So I'm going to go to the pad layer, and the pad sounds like this. We have another option with our parameter lock. We can cycle it to turn orange. What this does, it automatically writes the knob positions into the sequencer. So I can have a slight variation of this pad sound by creating one with the standard setting and then changing the wave to a different setting. So I'm going to create a sequence that has two different pad sounds within the same section. Just going to mute that drone so we can hear this a bit better. Because we had sound locking turned on when we recorded these steps, it's written the original setting for the wave knob into the sequencer. So it doesn't matter if we adjust this now, when that plays back, it will play back correctly. But I'm going to create another sound and record it up the top here. So as you can hear, this sound plays back with the mellower wave setting, and this one with the original. So using sound locking, you can create variations across different parts of the sequence. We're not restricted to just the cutoff from the wave knob. We can automate all these though. So anything that's on a knob that's per layer, we can automate, including reverb sends and panning and parts of the structure, all that stuff. So you can get really crazy and really complex, have some really evolving stuff going on. So it's just a few things in the menus to tidy up. We can access wave here, and we can rename our waves. We have import and export in the noise, which I'll go over in a minute. In the pattern, we can rename our pattern export too. We don't need a pattern import setting because it's just waiting to receive a pattern at any point. If we sent the MIDI over, it would pop up automatically. We've talked about these, so we've got clock settings here, so we can set a clock source, whether the clock's coming out of the audio for pocket operators, some polarity settings. We've got MIDI channels here. I'm not going to go over everything in these because it's detailed much better in the manual than I can explain it. But basically we've got a channel for the 4 layers, and output channel, and an auto channel. The auto channel is it's looking to receive MIDI on channel 6, and that will play whichever layer is currently selected. There's also some settings in this extra MIDI menu too. You can swap the out to a through, activate MIDI commands and program changes and things from here. In our system menu, we've got our chain loop. So I mentioned earlier on about pattern chaining. If we don't want it to loop, we can turn that to off and it'll just stop at the end. This is a mute mode. So like I said before as well, we mute the sequence when we use the mute by default. If we want it to be an audio mute, we can change that to sound. So that'll mute the actual audio, so it will just go on and off immediately. And that includes a playback of the actual track. Auto step we talked about. We've got an overall tune we can adjust. A reverb reset. So if you've got 2 patterns that play one after the other and they've got the same reverb setting, reverb reset is switched off, so it won't clear the buffer for the reverb, so it'll keep things smooth. If we want the pattern to reset completely, including the reverb, we can turn this on. Got a battery setting here, so if you're using rechargeables like I am, make sure you change this to nickel, metal or lithium as appropriate, because alkali is the default. This gives the Liven a much better idea of how much battery life there is left, and the battery warning will kick in at the correct time. We have auto power, so we can set this anywhere between half an hour to 6 hours or off. So this will just keep going until the batteries die. So this is our HTML page where we convert audio that we want to add to the noise layer. So I've got this recording here of some children playing on a beach. All I need to do is drag it into here. This is going to select the first 8 seconds. And we can choose a crossfade time. So if we just leave that off, update the preview here, we can hear the first 8 seconds. Or if I wanted to change this, I can change, say, to a 4-second crossfade and update the preview. And you'll see that's changed. This will play multiple times now to enable you to hear the crossfade. So we need to enter a name, so I'm just going to put beach, something like that. We can put dots in between if we want. I'm just going to use the 4 characters and then download the sysx file. This creates a file and it just goes into our standard downloads folder. So we need to find that because we'll need this later. Just going to copy that into this folder. So this is MIDI-OX and it's free. It's a Windows application. There's also an alternative available for Mac called Sysx Librarian. It works in a similar way. These instructions are just for Windows because I don't have Mac. I've already made a video once about updating the Livens. This is a very similar process. You just go into a different menu on the Liven to import samples. But I have my MIDI device selected here. So I have an M track selected. That is cabled into the Liven. So it's just connected to the MIDI in socket. We're going to open up the sysx window. I'm going to go File and Send sysx file. And this is the file we'll be sending. Over on the Liven, I need to go into the noise menu, select noise import, select which sample I want to overwrite, and then press OK. And that will put it into a state where it's waiting to receive this file. Then from the Send sysx file, if I press Open, it's going to say File Progress. Over on the Liven, the display will change to Receive to indicate it's receiving this sample. This will take a few minutes to transfer. Once that's complete, Save will appear. We can then press OK. And that sample will be saved down to the slot we selected. And can then back out of this menu. So if we want to back up one of our noise files, we can do it in the opposite direction. So also within MIDI-OX, if we open the sysx window, here we've got a setting, Receive Manual Dump. So we can set this waiting, and with the MIDI out of the Liven connected to the MIDI in of our interface, we can go into the noise menu, select Noise Export, choose the sample we want to export, and then press OK. Then this will start to send that data into MIDI-OX. Once the Liven's finished, we'll have a file here. We can press Done, and then that will just check the file. Then we can click Display Window, Save As, and then we can save this wherever we want. It's a good idea to name it whatever it is on the Liven. So that was WADS. So we can save this down. and then we've backed up our sample. So MIDI sys6 import and export works the same across the whole system, so this works for the patterns. You can back up your patterns, and you can do your firmware updates like this too. So I think that's pretty much everything. Let me know in the comments if there's anything I've missed, and please like and subscribe and keep an eye out for the Ambient Zero popping up again on the channel. Thanks very much. Cheers.